I was never a big Lee Camp fan. I saw other people react to some of his stuff on YouTube. I only remember him having that RT show, and he had that show, I think it was it Redacted or something like that. It was never my program, but I knew a bunch of leftists that liked Lee Camp and thought, you know, he was subversive and the like. Anyway, this is my first time sitting down listening to him really talk at length about foreign policy that I can remember. I think I might have listened to him speak at one other conference we might have reacted to on the channel before, but I wanted to check him trying to compare aid to hurricane victims to aid to Ukraine. And I've seen a lot of these comparisons done, but I haven't really talked about Lee Camp in a while, so I thought, you know, we'll just use him as the device here. Because to me, it seems like Ukraine is used here purely as an attack device with very little consideration for the people who would be affected by, say, cutting the aid to them. Let's listen.
Two clips of Joe Biden. One, he's talking on Ukraine, and the other, he's talking on Hurricane Helene that just killed well over 100 people, I believe, and destroyed lives across the entire southern United States. The second clip is hard to hear, so I'm going to have to repeat what he says. But
I'm proud to announce a new 2.4.
By the way, can we just, if we're going to compare the war in Ukraine and this, I think it makes sense to maybe, like, you know, people, it's also whatever, you know what, let him finish before I give my points. I don't want to get nitpicky. Just, you know, Hurricane Helen, over 100 people dies. War in Ukraine, just war in Ukraine. You know, there's mass graves, there's stuff that's attached to that as well. It's also a thing of import. It's not just a vague foreign thing.
So I'm going to have to repeat what he says. But
I'm proud to announce a new $2.4 billion package of security assistance.
that was the first one about Ukraine. Proud to announce billions of dollars more for Ukraine. And here is the same day.
I'm sorry, can we just say how cheap is that clip? How cheap is that clip? He just says, I'm proud to announce 2.4 billion for Ukraine. That's the condemnating clip? That's him enthusiastic in aid for Ukraine? Okay, whatever.
It's billions of dollars more for Ukraine. And here is the same day or one day later or something.
We've given them all everything that we have. We're on the ground.
He's been asked about the victims of Hurricane Helene and whether more federal aid is going to be sent to them. And he says, we've given them all the aid we have. We gave it all to them ahead of time. So no, we're not giving them any more aid.
So we're working hard.
Are there any more resources the federal government could be giving them?
Reporter asks, are there any more resources the federal government will be giving all the victims, all the towns, all the cities across the southern United States, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Louisiana, or there, South Carolina? Is there more aid coming from the federal government?
No, we pre-planned a significant amount of it, even though they didn't ask.
No, we pre-planned a significant amount. So we're not giving any more aid to all of the victims across the United States who have had their lives destroyed, not to mention some of them killed in Hurricane Helene, and we're not going to give them any more aid. But we are going to give billions and billions of dollars more to Ukraine to fight a proxy war in which we're just hoping that it'll last for a few more years and kill a few more 100,000 Ukrainians. We're already to the point that so many of them had died that they don't even have military-age men left in.
Boy, okay, he's starting to get into his rants and stuff about the military-aged men. By the way, the average age of a soldier in Russia is like 40. The average age of a soldier in Ukraine is like 43. It's largely due to post-Soviet demographic decline with both the Russians and the Ukrainians and many post-Soviet countries having their population drop off. So, I mean, you could say running out of military-age men. What is a military-age man in that context? If you look at the Russian side, it's going to be a bunch of people in their 40s and 50s and sometimes their 60s as well. You should see the people who are taken as prisoners of war. And when you also have a bunch of exemptions for young people between the ages of 18 and 23, largely having to do with education, if you're going to college and stuff like that, then you're going to have a bunch of exemptions that are heavily focused on young people. Then you've got other exemptions that have to do with like raising kids and such. But once you get 40, 50 years old, that's when the kids are moving out of the home. So the exemptions are for very young people. The exceptions that come with children, they move out in the 40s and 50s. And there was a post-Soviet demographic decline that made it so there's much less people being born in Ukraine and in Russia in post 1990 something. I forget the exact 1990. But just trying to, the way that he's selling it at the end here is so many people have died that the average age of the soldier has risen. Whereas like they had a bunch of 25-year-olds and they all got killed. And now it's just a bunch of like 43. No, it was at the start of the war. The army was made up of mostly professional soldiers. And it was probably much younger. Then the general population got drafted. And if you were to look at the average age of the Ukrainian, guess what it is around? 43 years old. I think it might be 41 compared to 43. So there's a 2-year difference. So it is the general population getting conscripted and making the military more representative of the general population. So it's not that they had all these like tons of plentiful military age men. The country was in a demographic crisis before the invasion. So that's the first thing. As for the other thing here, I hate this image of support to Ukraine. I wish Lee Camp's view of the world was real here about Ukraine. I wish it was. I wish it was that the Biden administration at every step of the way, it was like at the port with the striking workers, and they were just like, yeah, get all the Ukraine aid over every day of the year. We had a 10-month period where Ukraine aid got tied to immigration policy. For what reason? For no reason. Completely partisan reasons. It was something that supposedly both sides of the party were supposed to support, but because of a uproar in the Republican base, they then had to tie these two issues together because the base was saying no Ukraine aid without a border deal, despite the fact that Democrats and Republicans are still very distant on the way the border should be managed on many issues. For example, like the Dreamers, and in the deal that was negotiated by very ultra-conservative Senator James Langford from the state of Oklahoma. Okay, that's not exactly like the humanities section of the college department when it comes to the country. Okay, that's not where they're all going. Their senator negotiated the deal. And then when they had the deal, Trump shot it down because he said openly he wanted the issue. He didn't want to give Biden a win on it. And so after 10 months of delay, they passed basically the same Ukraine aid bill 10 months later after it had a real battlefield impact. And so the way it's being discussed here is as if, oh, well, you know, this country just cares so much about Ukraine and it's willing to screw. For 10 months, they held up aid that ended up probably leading to the casualties of probably, I mean, if you want me to be for real with you, thousands of people, really having an effect on the battles like Avdiivka. And I mean, it's not to say all the supply issues would have been solved, but if you had a clear flow of aid during that period and they didn't run out of money and the aid packages got smaller and smaller every month, it could have had a different impact. But that was 10 months. It was blocked. And right now, there's no dream of passing a new Ukraine aid bill at the moment. When Mike Johnson was asked to extend it, he was stopped. When Zelensky came over to visit Mike Johnson a year ago, Johnson blew him off. This year, he blew him off again. So like this image of, oh, aid to Ukraine is just so flowing and so easy to get and is so simple. I just wish it was true. It just isn't. It just isn't. It got held up too. It got held up. It got undermined. And let's also talk about the difference here. You don't think that Biden was having to say things like he just said on the bottom there about the hurricane aid? For 10 months, he wasn't saying stuff like, we need to pass it in the House. He was. Every time he was asked about it, he was like, we need to pass it in the House. We need to pass the legislation. I can't send more until we pass more legislation. So if I just like threw a bunch of like language like there's no aid for our allies that we've abandoned for the people being dumped in mass graves. And then we've got like, we're in the same position here. We're in the same position of it getting held up when it shouldn't be. Now, as to when it comes to the federal funding, there was federal funding proposed for Congress that was blocked for FEMA that could be used currently, but are now not being used because the federal FEMA funds were not approved. And Mike Johnson is showing no interest of approving more funds for FEMA to go get people support. And that's a real issue, and it's an issue should be confronted, but there's no reason why we have to bring up Ukraine and bludgeon support for this country that gave up its nuclear arsenal, that embraced nuclear nonproliferation at our request, not even at our request, at our threat. And now we're just supposed to leave them in the wind because of this clip chimping? Really? Okay. Why is it that we need to pivot these issues against each other? Why do we need to pivot these people against each other? Why can't it be we walk and chew bubblegum at the same time? Why do we think so lowly of our country? It's not like Vietnam where the average age was 19. It's a totally different, I mean, it's a country with different demographics, with a different population. Of course it's different.